Welcome to the fourth meeting of the event online series, Sisters Empowering Women, which is based on the magistry of Pope Francis, on the words chosen by the Pope. So 7 themes in a 7-course meal. Today we have chosen the word care, and we believe that the mission of sisters is to take care in the various fields, in the various environments, in the various situations. And as you are well aware, each webinar has been organized like a meal. So a 7-course meal. We start with an appetizer, then we move into the main meal, the main course, and then we conclude our meal with a dessert. Now, before starting, I would like to share with you the spot we have prepared for these events.
Bene, per ogni evento abbiamo...
As I mentioned, for each event, we have also chosen one of the quotes from Fratelli Tutti. And for this one, in particular, we have chosen one section of number 79 that reads, all of us have a responsibility for the wounded, those of our own people and all the peoples of the earth. Let us care for the needs of every man, young and old, with the same fraternal spirit of care and closeness that marked the Good Samaritan. And it is with this spirit that I would like to open this meal on care with a biblist, a biblical scholar. She will basically help us to focus on the beautiful inspiration that the Pope has given us with the Good Samaritan. And what I would like to ask her, and if I were the wounded person on the road, what if I am the stranger on the road? Welcome, Samira. First of all, I'd like to invite you to open up your microphone. So now I'm going to do a proper presentation. So Samira Youssef Habil Siderius, she is an Egyptian biblical scholar. She studied biblical theology at the Gregorian University. She feels like a woman serving the word of God between Egypt, Italy, the Middle East, so around the Mediterranean. She's a member of the International Biblical Federation, the Italian Federation, and the Federation of the Middle East. She teaches in the faculties of theology and seminaries between Egypt and Italy. She leads retreats, Bible days, guides meetings for Lectio Divina, for religious and lay people, and many more activities that Samira. So first of all, Samira, thank you very much for having accepted this invitation. I would say this is a moment really to actually interiorize and to take care. Thank you so much. Thank you for this invitation. And thank you for all of those who are with us. I am really very, very happy to be here with you and to present a very special theme, that is to take care in the actual biblical meaning and in the Luke's theology. It's a very important one, particularly in Luke's words. Through this one, we together are going to focus on a very important one, which is really linked to our common reality, that is to take care of our own fragility. Luke in chapter 10, 25-35 presents the parable of the Good Samaritan. but which he interprets and which he has basically chosen among the synoptical books. But we would like to interpret this meaning of this word, actually where he has given us as a key word, of which I would like to underline three mainly in his trilogy. The first one is actually the womb, the divine womb. The second one is the word to take care, the word to take care in this text. And then the third one presents a very simple explanation through a very simple tool, which allows us to tackle both the inner and external, so the interior and external challenges of taking care of oneself in a very concrete manner. The parables in the Second Testament are part of the literary narrative genre of the Bible and play an important role in the simplification of the divine mysteries. The parable under consideration gives us light to understand how to be close, first of all, to one's own wounded inner self. In reality, each of us carries within him or her a pure and beautiful virginal part and another part stained with darkness and in need of care. When we lose the balance between both, we fall on the street and we live as the half-dead of the parable. And we run the danger of letting ourselves die while we are alive because we neglect the vulnerable, the vulnerable part within ourselves without taking care of it. When we take care of our wounds, then we are able to understand and heal the vulnerabilities of others. The biblical world of Luke is wonderful, and it presents us the figure of the fragile, of the weak, who seems passive. We hear neither his voice nor a reaction, nor even a sign of gratitude for the good received. This figure represents all of us. When we go through periods of vulnerability, we become persons alien to ourselves. And when we free this vulnerable, fragile inside ourselves, we try to flee and to escape. And we believe that we are dead while we are alive. So the fragile part waits to be welcomed and cared with compassion, to be reconciled and integrated. Now, before reading this part of the Luke's, I would like to basically focus on some of the last words in 21, 24, where we hear the voice of the Lord, a voice which tells us, Father, God of the earth and of the land, which you have hidden all this and you have revealed them to the smallest. And in fact, Luke presents this parable in answering to one of the questions of the wise men who do not know and who are unable to understand the divine mysteries. And he basically tries to reply to their request and to their question. And he replies as follows. A doctor of the law stood up to put him to test, asking, Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? And the man answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, you have answered well. Do this and you will live. But the man, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, but who is my neighbor? And Jesus resumed, a man was walking down from Jerusalem to Jericho and ran into robbers who stripped him They stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down, so I would say, let's say a sister, not a priest, happened to be going down the same road, and by chance, the sister was going down the same road, and when she saw him, she passed by on the other side. A Levite also, when he came to the place, saw him and passed by. But instead, a Samaritan, who was also walking along the same road, saw him. And so compassion, he goes next to him. And he also bound his wounds. 5, pouring on them oil and wine. 6, loading him on his little donkey. 7, took him to an inn. 8, cared for him. And on the following day, he took out 2 pieces of money and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him. And what you spend extra, I will pay back when I return." The conclusion of this text, and we hear Jesus' voice, who's asking a question to the counterpart, and he asks, "Which of the 3 do you think was the neighbor of the one who ran into the robbers?" He answered, "The one who had compassion on him." Jesus said to him, "Go and do the same." So the dialogue and the discussion in the text on the question, revolving around the question, how do you inherit life after death? Well, the passage moves us with the gestures of the enemy of the Jews, who is the Samaritan. And here I would like to underline 3 key points of the text. The first is passage 33, where Luke offers us the first key, which marks a particularity in his theology, and which I present as a fundamental place today for this term, that is to have compassion. So this is the second, action of the Samaritan. It's repeated twice in the parable. In its Hebrew origin, the word or the term to have compassion is rahim. Rahim is the womb. In the Greek translation of Luke, it is expressed spalanzomai, which is a central verb, spalanizomai, which is used only by Luke in 3 occurrences precisely. Here, so when Jesus meets the widow of Nain, 7:13, and in the parable of the merciful father, chapter 15:20. Now, let's go back to our Samaritan. So Luke identifies it with the attitude of the Samaritan when he sees the half-dead man by narrating, after he had seen him, then he immediately had compassion. The Samaritan is moved by compassion, described by the movement of his bowels, which tighten from the compassion, and then leads to 10 behaviors, 10 actions. These bowels of the Samaritan do make us think about the womb of God, that is the divine one. And in Luke's narration tells us, it shows a circular movement which links the heart with the mind in order to allow us to feel how can we touch the inner part of God, starting from our human vulnerability in order to generate a mature man, a mature adult person who is able to accept one's vulnerability. In fact, the divine womb is actually the place where the vulnerable person is. And I would suggest now to enter into this womb, and in order to take care of one's vulnerability. the divine, let's say, womb is a place of compassion, which is both female and male, because it's both the Father, God is Father, Mother. And that's precisely where we feel accompanied and not alone in our fragility, but always followed by the benevolent gaze of the Lord. The second key is found in the passages 34, 35, passage 34, 35, where Luke uses a verb, epimeleomai, to take care. And also in number 34, it's used in a passive form, referring to the Samaritan, where he says, he took care of him. And the second time at passage 35, where the Samaritan almost begs the innkeeper, saying, take care of him. And this form is passive imperative. In passage 34, the Samaritan has had the experience of the vulnerability of the Jew. And this is the first use. In the second, it recommends the Samaritan and asks another to do this, to have the same experience, to take care of the other. And here I would like to underline the humanity of the gestures of the Samaritan when he takes care, because he has touched the heart of the Jewish Torah, which he did not know, because the Samaritan are enemies. They have their own laws. The third and last key I would like to explain to you as a tool and as a means to take care of our vulnerability, where Luke presents a way of solving the enmity on, so both the Samaritan and the Jewish, they were enemies at this time. Now each person carries within both the enmity between the two, because on the one hand, we certainly welcome the virginal part of the person, but on the other, we reject the fragile part, and it is the vulnerable and fragile part which is asking for help. And Luke helps us to basically tackle this inner enemy that makes the inner vulnerable with a look of goodness, touching it with tenderness, touching vulnerability with tenderness. Now, this means, which is a hidden means of knowing how to deal with fragility, vulnerability, by revealing, by disclosing it in the weaker one, is what Jesus, in the expression proclaimed by Jesus in verse 37, go and do likewise. It indicates to us the essential, what we should do. The act of taking care, both in the indicative and in the imperative mode, which is the reconciliation of the intimate self, learning to deal with the inner enmity, with an harmony and balance between the two parts, the virginal and the vulnerable one. Now, this instrument is also used and experienced within the divine womb. By crossing one's vulnerability, it is possible to take care of the vulnerability or fragility of others. Now, I would like to share with you a beautiful experience, somehow applying this parable to our century and our life. And I would like to basically read you my interpretation. So it's not the word of the Lord, but it's our world and our daily life. So somehow inspired by what the text is telling us. An unnamed, an alien person descended from his or her pride towards the path of humility and ran into some brigands who were the vulnerable. You know, sometimes we have some inflated ego, we have difficult relationships, inner worries, external ones like your daily lives, which stripped the person of all his energy and beauty. And then they left. Went away, leaving the person half dead. Now, by chance, Along the same street, she stopped in front of the mirror. And when she saw herself, she ran, she fled, and she crossed over to the other side. When she came to a sacred place, it seemed like a church, and maybe she even took communion. Then, passing by, she saw herself again in the mirror and passed on for the second escape. Instead, at dawn, before plunging into her daily chores, passing by the mirror once again, she stared at herself and saw she felt compassion, came to herself, noticed the wounds. She felt ashamed. She put her rucksack on the shoulders, entered the chapel, and there began to bandage her wounds, pouring on them oil of mercy and wine of forgiveness. And that is where she took care of herself, of her vulnerability, and the merciful gaze of the Lord. The following day, the next day, she took out two things, a pen and a paper, and she wrote to herself, "Please, take care of me. Come near, remain close. Remember that heal my wounds today, you will heal tomorrow, neighbor, and you will become more credible." Now, in order to conclude this beautiful moment of taking care, I have presented three essential frameworks which are at the heart of Luke's episode. First, the divine womb as a fruitful place that teaches us techniques of healing one's own vulnerability, accompanied by the merciful presence through the word to have compassion, to be compassionate. Second, the verb to take care, as we have noticed, not only in following the interpretation of Luke's verb, but also when applied to our daily life, that somehow is inviting us to focus on how to take care of oneself. And third is a tool to know how to face oneself, that is how to tackle inner and outer challenges, not to find ourselves stripped of life. All that we have described guides us to grow in the knowledge of the mystery of God that is currently revealed in the rebirth from the world of God, which is revealed from the rebirth and which allows us to perceive our vulnerability, to recover our inner and relational peace with the world. And the goal that I hope that I have achieved together with you, to be Samaritans of oneself first. Only then we can be Samaritans of others. Samaritans who take care of the frailties of others. It's always the Lord who's always speaking to us with compassion. Take care of your vulnerability. I thank you very much. I hope I have actually reached this goal. Really, truly, thank you very, very sincerely. There are so many words that echo, but I would like to leave them just to resound. Maybe we can just put a question for those who are following and who are listening. I would like to invite to write a message. Write to yourself a message of compassion to our wounds, and what would help us to live in this divine womb. I would like to take 1 minute of silence, a personal reflection, before moving on, because our first speaker is going to further deepen. Thank you really so much. Thank you truly very much.
Bene, proseguiamo la nostra riflessione dopo questo bellissimo momento.
Maybe we'd like to move on after this beautiful moment of contemplation, which is really helping us to be in contact with our fragility, but simply to value it and not to, which is really helping us to be in contact with our fragility, but simply to value it and not to, which is really helping.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lockdown last year, she accompanied us to reflect on how we can manage and cope with this situation that we have been She accompanied us to reflect. Sister Marianne is a member of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia and New Papua New Guinea. To reflect. She's a psychologist, is a member of she's presently a research professor at the School of Social Work, Boston College. She's a psychologist, is a member and the research associate she's presently a research professor at the School of Social Work, Sister Logri, Boston College. Sister Marianne and the research associate of refugee service has served as a member of the Australian Government College, Ministry of Immigration, and in 2010 she was awarded the Order of Australia has served as a member of the displaced persons. Ministry of Immigration and in 2010 so you are most welcome, Marianne, and the piece that would displace we would like you to help us is care as a pastoral path of building fraternal relationships. The floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much. And a thank you to Samira for her presentation. I'm going to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint that might help people to follow where I'm going. And I want to start by, it's exactly 8 years today that Pope Francis went to Lampedusa, exactly 8 years. And it was his first trip out of Rome. And if you remember, he went to Lampedusa, which was where people were crossing the Mediterranean in boats. Tens of thousands of people were crossing and many drowned. And Pope Francis went there as his first place to visit in his papacy out of Rome. And I hope you can see that the altar he used was a boat. And it was next to what they called the graveyard of boats, the boats that kind of had brought people and then were in disrepair. And there he spoke to us about our indifference, the globalization of indifference, and our lack of capacity to weep. So I think it's very significant that 8 years on, he's calling us to care, because then 8 years ago, he was saying, do we care about these people, the plight of these people, the plight of people who were on our borders, but we were not necessarily aware. And as I think many of you know, the UISG has a project, an ongoing project there at Lampedusa, working with the people who've come as migrants there. So that's 8 years ago exactly today. I just couldn't believe the coincidence. In Australia, there's been a story that's been in our media. This is from the Catholic Leader is one of our Catholic newspapers, of a family that's also come by boat. The family is known to some of our sisters. They're a Sri Lankan family. And just to tell you the story quickly, the father came first by boat, a different boat. The mother now, she came on a second boat and they were married. So the two children that they have were born in Australia. And they have sought asylum, and we have a very harsh system in Australia, and they were found not to be refugees. And early one morning, the Australian government rounded them up to send them back to Sri Lanka. And there was court interventions and many, many stories. But to make a story of them, the Australian government put them into a very harsh detention centre on an island off Australia. And what's happened in the last months is that the Australian population, who is not necessarily always sympathetic to migrants and refugees, have seen this as a cause. And there was a petition, 350,000 people wrote to the government saying, let these people stay. And even government ministers and government representatives started to break rank and to say, these people should stay. And what I've been asking myself in the last little while is, why has Australia and the 350,000 cared about these people? What is it that Pope Francis asked us 8 years ago that's touched a lot of people to be concerned about this family? And I think the answer is two things. One is the children themselves. We've been touched by the children, and we've been touched by the fact that they're born in Australia, which doesn't necessarily make them refugees. So it's a different issue there. But also because they'd become known. As they were awaiting their asylum claim, they lived in a rural part of Australia and people came to know them. So that difference between us not knowing the people that Pope Francis was talking about on the boats and then coming to know them. I think that coming to experiencing them, to know their name, to work alongside them has helped us as a nation care about these people. So I'm wanting us tonight or today to have a look at what it is to care. How is it that we come to care? What makes us care? And I'm talking as a psychologist in this area. Here's a nice thing I found as I was moving around. What do you want to be when you grow up? Kind, said the boy. When I use the word caring, and when Francis used the word caring, and Samira, when you were talking as well, I noticed that we also use other words, caring, kindness, compassion. So there will be some movement around with these words as I speak today. Just looking at what's happened though in our pandemic is, I think the word kindness has been the stronger word that's come. And I think there's a discussion going on at the moment as to whether, and Pope Francis is helping this, but has there been a kind of and this is a term that's not my term, a revolution of kindness? Have we in this time of the pandemic come to recognize the need to care and the need to be closer? And what I've noticed in our time of pandemic is it's modified our behavior. It's changed our behavior. As you know, we've had masks introduced, and that's changed how we see people. Sometimes now we don't immediately recognize them. The other day I met a stranger on the street and she said, I have to learn to use my eyes more to make contact with people and to show I'm connecting. We've been asked to stay at home. Many of us have come to know our neighbours. We saw them before, we nodded to them, but in being at home, maybe in our same apartment block or whatever, we've come to know them and to express concern. Do they need help? Can we do some shopping for them? And of course, in particular, as you would all recognise, there's been great concern for our frontline workers, our health workers. And the revolution that some people are saying is that we've made and become willing to make personal sacrifices for a common good. So a little bit like the story I was saying with the coming to know the Australian family, the Sri Lankan family in Australia, I think the pandemic has pushed us a little bit towards showing more kindness, being more caring, if I can say that. I've got here an image. You've seen, there was one in, obviously in many, many countries, but here's one in India of people acknowledging in the evening the healthcare workers by sounds and applause and clapping. So it's really knowing that there's a capacity for us to be kind and compassionate on a large scale, not just to individuals, but collectively. And I think that's what the pandemic has shown us to a degree as such. If I look at the word caring, and I've looked just at the Oxford English Dictionary, its definition is for us to feel concern, great or little, but to be concerned, to trouble oneself, to go outside of ourselves, to be troubled. And again, Samira was talking about this, and to feel an interest. So it's the flip side of what Francis was saying when he was saying about the indifference, the globalization of indifference. Caring is the opposite, where we're not indifferent. We show some concern, some care. But as I said to you, there's a number of words that we use. And if you do a search on caring, you very quickly move into other words like the compassion, as Samira was saying, or kindness. And another word that comes is empathy, to get inside another person's feelings. And of course, the word love. So I will be focusing on caring, but I think I'm moving between several concepts, if I can say that. And compassion certainly is one, and kindness another. The pandemic, though, has also, we are naturally social beings. Humans are social beings. And we've suffered during this time because we have had isolation. We've been distanced. We've lost touch. And it has impacted on many of us on our mental health. Presently, I'm in Sydney, I'm not in Boston, and we're in lockdown again. And that's not an easy place to be, because you know what it's like. We've had the experience. And so it's there's quite a bit of concern that there'll be increased mental health problems, especially for the young, who are again impacted by their inability to go to school or to have to go online. So while I've said that the pandemic has brought us a deeper sense maybe of kindness, it's also impacted how we are together collectively. I want to say, though, today that I think it might be a strong statement, but I think we know more about kindness than we've ever known before. We know more about what it means to care than ever before. And one of the reasons is that we now know a lot about our brain. We now know the interactions in our brain and how the brain changes as we show signs of kindness. So, and we call that the neuroscience. It's the science of inside our brain. And I'm going to talk with you about a tiny bit about the neuroscience of kindness. What happens in our brain when we're kind? How do we know this? Because we can now do experiments. We can ask somebody to do an act of kindness. We can show a story of kindness and caring. We can have a movie about caring, and we can see what parts of the brain literally light up when we are caring, when we are showing empathy, when we are in pain. There are different parts of the brain responding. And what's now been shown to us in evidence and research is that kindness actually has a number of elements of what I'm calling their competencies. To be kind isn't just one act, it's a mixture of responses. And what we seem to know from the science now is that we need to have empathy, the feeling with another. We need to also have love, affection for another. We also need to have compassion, which we've heard a little bit about already, the capacity to feel another's distress. And another concept that's very interesting to me is the theory of mind, which is our ability to understand somebody else's beliefs and intentions, to actually enter into their mind, suspend my thinking, and to understand where they are, what their thinking is. All of these are competencies for kindness. So if one bit's missing, our kindness is depleted. If we are loving, but we don't really understand their beliefs, then our kindness is depleted. The good news about this is that these are elements that we can work on. These are elements of kindness from a psychological perspective that can be informed or changed. So I'm not sure what your initial thinking was about caring or kindness. And we often talk of that's a kind person or she's a caring person. But what the science is telling us is that there are elements of that kindness and they are not God-given. They're not personality. They are things that can be developed and they are things that can also be trained. And I'll come back to that. I won't go into it in detail because it's, I find it very, very complex and I'm sure you don't want to know too much about it. But what we know about these competencies is that if we are looking at a person's brain, we can see that all of those elements are being impacted by the act of kindness. So there's a part of the brain that's lighting up because of love, a part of the brain that's lighting up because of empathy, a part of the brain that's lighting up because of understanding, and a part of the brain that's opening up because of compassion. And the science now tells us, and I find this very exciting, is that, and I'll use the word plasticity, the kinder we are, the more our brain becomes used to being kind and changes. Now, let me say that again a different way. What we learned about 20 years ago, I think it was, that if somebody had experienced what we call trauma, so very difficult life event, maybe witnessing a murder, maybe domestic violence, many terrible things that cause trauma, being part of war, we could see as scientists that that changed people's brains. I'm telling you the flip side now, that we can also see that if you practice kindness, your brain becomes more used to kindness and makes you a kinder person. So I'll say that again because it's a very important part of what I'm to say. Your brain can be shaped or formed and you can become a kinder person because we know that the inside of your brain changes the kinder you are, the more you practice kindness. So I can come back to that if there's questions, but it's a very exciting concept. And you'll see there I've used the word formation. a word that we know very much in religious life. What this means is we can work with each other to help each other become more kind or more caring. We can help each other to do that, and the brain will respond. So research shows that with kindness training or formation, we can increase positive emotions. We can increase social connectivity and pro-social behavior, which in turn decreases negative feelings, biases, and I like this last bit, it even slows our biological aging. So the science of what's happened to us in the last 18 months with the pandemic, if we have with others been more caring, if there has been this kindness revolution in our neighborhood, in our workplace, then the science is saying we are more likely to continue to be kind, because the evidence is that that has been changing our brain's behavior. And it's almost like it's contagious. If we see people being kind, it evokes a kindness from us. If we see people caring, it evokes care from us. Another way of saying what I'm wanting to talk about is about compassion. Remember, I said that these words sometimes interchange a bit, but compassion in particular is when we are focusing on suffering. And we've seen a lot of suffering in our in the last 18 months. And again, Pope Francis was calling us to look at the suffering in particular of the boat people 8 years ago. And that continues. The components of compassion, one is cognitive, of the head. So it's even an awareness that people are suffering. Then there's the affect, which is the emotional, where we actually are moved by seeing that suffering. The third part is the intentional, where we want to see the suffering eased. We don't want the suffering to continue. And then the fourth is that we actually do something to stop the suffering. So again, what has been part of us as women religious in particular's lives of being caring, having ministries of mercy, has now been through the science sort of pulled apart a bit to look at what are the components. But also, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I'll say it again, these components can be further developed. So when we come to our ministry, we don't come and stop as the caring person we are today. Our ministry evokes from us awareness. It evokes from us responsiveness and emotion. And that in turn continues to make us become more and more caring people. And we work with others to help them also to care. So when Pope Francis is saying, how do we turn from indifference? How do we start to weep again? We do that by addressing all of these elements. It's not just about going to prayer. It's also about becoming aware of why are there people on the waters as refugees? Or why are there homeless near me? Or why are there people with mental illness and nobody wants to be near them? Or why are the Indigenous people in Canada suffering? So we need to actually do some analysis. We need to develop an awareness. And the more we have this kind of, as I've been saying, formation or training in these elements, then the more caring we can become.
Marianne, you still have 2 minutes.
Okay, very good. I will move. I just wanted to pick up on two elements that were said. One is the one of kindness in the Old Testament of Hesed. The advantage that we have, is over the psychology is we also know kindness and caring from God's love. And as Samira said to us as well, we have also the insight of Rahamim, of the womb-like compassion. So we can not only be trained or formed to be more caring people, but we have also within our faith tradition and our relationship with God, another element, which is the insight of God being with us in our wish to be kind or caring. I'm happy to stop there and for there to be later comments or questions if that's helpful, Patricia. And I can unshare my screen so that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Marianne we are enjoying the same theme from different aspects, but there is a fil rouge, you know? And I like the way you connect caring with kindness, mercy, compassion. It comes back to the divine womb that Samira was mentioning. And I like also the fact that we can educate our brain, because if we let us experience compassion, we can educate us. So the theme that we have chosen, Sisters Empowering Women, it's really that sisters can empower other women towards a common compassion, a common kindness. And this is really following the Pope Francis Magisterium, saying that we have to enlarge our we. We have to become always more and more we. So thank you very much, Marianne. And I would like to invite the participants. We will make it available her presentation to all. And I would like to invite the participants, before asking questions when we will have the Q&A session, is to write one word in the chat, which echoes particularly in me right now after listening to Samira and Marianne, before we go towards the second speaker. We will keep all your words and we will create a sort of tag cloud to share as a result of this sharing. Thank you again, Marianne. And now I'm very happy. I will try to move into French, which is not very easy for me. Je suis vraiment contente d'accueillir.
I'm truly very, very happy to introduce to Sister Véronique Magron. I think she's well known. And also thank you, because I know that you're really very busy and so for making this time for us. I would like to introduce Sister Veronique. She's a Dominican sister of the presentation. She's also a vocalist. She's been elected moral theologian, elected provincial prioress of France in 2013 and re-elected in 2018. She's also president of the Conference of Religious of France, men and women, since 2016. This responsibility has led her to be even more involved in the fight against pedocriminality in the Catholic Church and the recognition of victims. As a theologian and ethicist, she has a long practice of welcoming people in suffering, particularly victims of sexual abuse and of abuse in general. And this is why we have asked Sister Veronique to share with us a more spiritual and theological presentation on taking care. Taking care. Thank you very much, Veronique, for your sharing with us. And you have 20 minutes. Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you really to all. I apologize because I just arrived a bit sort of on a last minute call. I'm really sorry, but this is life. I would like to basically stick to what I was asked. That is to, what could I mention in terms of what is a spiritual aspect of taking care? And to do that, I would like to start with a short introduction. And then, of course, I will also the Samaritan.
En quelque sorte, hein, qui se répondront en quelque sorte. Donc, tout d'abord, que dire de cette
So, first of all, what could I mention in terms of the spiritual dimension? I can say that the spiritual dimension certainly cannot be seized, compared to the biological, psychological, or social. It cannot be sort of grasped, seized. Yes, in terms of neurosciences, yes. So if you do, a head scan, necessarily, but I would say that this is not something that we can do in our daily life. And this is why the spiritual dimension somehow refers to something, we cannot control, we cannot master. We are the ones who can decide. We cannot we cannot control, and we cannot command. It is or it is not. It is given or not given, according to what we are, what we do, and what we receive. In other words, I believe that we find ourselves in this somehow unusual paradox, that is a spiritual dimension of taking care does not necessarily mean that you give yourself as a voluntaristic movement. You take care of yourself. You have to do something. It's a very concrete action. But instead, the spiritual dimension shows witnesses and reflects openness towards the other, towards the world. And it reflects in particular our decision to refuse the idea that the world of the other is enclosed, refusing that destiny is inevitable, that illnesses are there. Illnesses exist, dramas, traumas, they all exist. And this is why the spiritual dimension is also admitting that this can be, you're unable to control, to modify. There is no, let's say, concrete materialistic dimension. And what happened yesterday or in my life is that there is no longer a future for me. And this somehow touches upon the spiritual question that is within the idea of taking care. So I would say taking care in its spiritual dimension is the counterpart of what is absurd, is refusing what is absurd. And in the listening to, what we have at the beginning of this meeting with the parable of the Good Samaritan, what does he do of the half-dead, of the wounded? He refuses the reaction of the, the priest, who is absolutely closed and self-centered in a given ritual, in a given legal prescription. So that basically leaves a half-dead man to die on the road. And this is absolutely absurd. So the spiritual dimension is refusing to make absurdity prevail. And it is also accepting the idea that the absurd or the absolute dimension of life is at the core of any life, even the most difficult, the most fragile, the most abandoned, like the wounded man, or like the one of the Samaritan. And we could quote so many examples in our lives. Think about how many people where the spiritual dimension has crossed many fragile lives. Ours, mine. So when you say taking care is not something which happens necessarily only in someone who has a very strong and solid life, able to change the future and fate, but instead it comes in the midst of even our fragility. And it is basically linked to the fact that we refuse to accept what we are, to refuse that what we are is reasonable, is just. And so to struggle along these lines in order to allow for a future, to allow for life to blossom. And this is why I believe that the spiritual dimension of taking care, it is not something which is basically driven by someone who is guiding, who is wanting, to give a lesson, who is in almighty, who wants to stand as a model for others, but rather, I would say, like the philosopher Paul Ricard defines the testimony. So it's the testimony. And who is the testimony? The witness is someone who feels that and who lives that on his own skin, on his own life, in order to show truth, the true value of a human being and of humanity. So when you experience a trauma, an injustice, and our commitment is together to help, at least to try, but not always we succeed, to cross this life. So all together, we should be able to fight and to defeat absurdity. And I would like now to, just focus on a few elements about the, the Good Samaritan. I would say that the spiritual dimension, of course, a Christian spiritual dimension of taking care, implies the fact that we as testimonies, I don't know if we really are testimonies, God certainly knows, but we do not know. It's something we cannot master, we cannot control. So basically, we should engage as testimonies to consent and to depart from the well-known path, from well-known ideas and concepts, to depart from, as I said, well-known pathways, because if we follow Etty's Hillesum's word, to be just like the homeless, the defenseless, the powerless, of the most vulnerable, which does not mean the person is incompetent, but simply that the system of defense is weaker. And to be just like the homeless, who allow reality and the reality of the other to be moved by pain, anguish, disillusion, despair. So, in a very meaningful way, I think that all of this is actually narrating. So going back to the story of the tale of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10, I would like to now basically focus on a few elements in order to conclude my very simple contribution. What happens in this text? Let's say that I see different pictures and different scenes. When you see a Levite, so a theologian, someone who is actually very much familiar with the law and implementing and putting it in force and questioning the Lord with the question with capital letters that all rabbis were asking, Master, what must I do to share in eternal life? So this Levite asks the Master. The Levite is actually mastering the law and is asking the Master, you know, of course, from his usual view and vision of distributive justice, what must I do to inherit eternal life? For he does the right thing. He does not doubt. There's no room for doubt. And then, of course, he believes that logically God will make him an heir to eternal life. But Jesus instead returns him to himself by asking him about the center of the scriptures, about its beating heart, which is the double love expressed by the two verses of the law of Moses, the Deuteronomy 6:5 and Levite 19 verse 18. And Jesus does not only ask him about what is in the law, but about his act of reading. How do you read it? So from the outset, Jesus enters into a debate and questions. So he basically departs from what is well known, departs from the content, daring to interpret. So the doctor of the law, the Levite, says, but then who is my neighbor? This was a great question, which was also shared by all of the rabbis of the time, and which is too often, that is also something that we today also too often face. And then there is a second stage, a second image, let's say, which starts when the Levite is talking to Jesus, because Jesus no longer answers directly to the question, you know, this direct question, but who is my neighbor, compared to the first one. Jesus answers with a second question. So he basically tells a parable, and he says a man was walking down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So he goes from Jerusalem is a city of the temple, so where the presence of God is inhabited. So he leaves Jerusalem, where God is living, to move away from God, going down to Jericho. And in fact, he fell into the hands of the robbers, of the godless, and was left half dead, inevitably. The priest and the Levite see this and ignore I don't know if it was out of indifference, out of the legalistic respect for ritual prescriptions of the time. And I also would like to invite you to read the interpretations of the Bible, which are very well known on the about the rituals. That is, these two men, the priest and the Levite, have seen, but their eyes are closed. Because they're closed and they're blocked by the law, they're blocked by the danger of impurity, they are dead. They're dead because they don't see anything. The only thing they see are their eyes, but the eyes of the flesh, not the eyes of the heart and of compassion. So the gospel here does not present any moral teaching. It's simply taking stock of the heart of those who should be servants of God. These are simple notes, you know, the blindness of the hearts of those who are the servants of God. And the servants of God are blind, but they're blind, the blindness of their hearts. They know perfectly well the eyes of the law do not allow them to see what is actually so visible. A man who's dying on the road. So it's very much makes much sense that only an heretic, you know, Samaritan would be touched. Only someone who does not worship in Jerusalem, who can be close to this wounded man, caught in the guts, by a single glance, and certainly not affected by this indifference, but instead marked by compassion. Nothing is prejudged. He doesn't have anything you know, pre-planned, and remains open. He allows himself to be touched by the unexpected encounter, by the unexpected situation, and it is a man who's bringing the man back to life. When you say back to life in the gospel, is bringing back someone to God. So we are exactly in the heart of this paradox. It is this Samaritan, the heretic, who is going to bring the blessed and the wounded man back to God, and not the servants of God. Because, of course, because he's certainly being a testimony of the spiritual dimension of taking care. And the Samaritan does that based on the perception of their common humanity, which is the core of taking care. And of this man who becomes the, you know, the neighbor of the Samaritan's neighbor. Now that he has been touched in the guts, the Samaritan is committed in saving and healing this life doomed to death. He basically leaves that, you know, lower part of life where everything that we have so many false ideas. How many among our sisters, friends, neighbors, Christians, and many more in our world, both believers and non-believers, really allowed to eliminate the gaps in this word where death, suffering lies. That man, the Samaritan, is aware of not mastering the situation, and that all the way to the end, because he, after all, the man on the road who's the wounded is not mastering the situation. And the Samaritan hands him over to the innkeeper, and then he basically leaves. So when he returns, he's not going to return to be thanked by the man, but he's simply returning to make sure that he has covered all the needs of the man. So the man, the wounded man, of course, needs the money to be wounded and taken care. So the Samaritan here decides that he's not going to master the destiny of this man. He simply brought this man back to life. He simply put him back on track, and he doesn't ask anything in exchange, and certainly not a word of thankness. But thinking about Christ, who basically lets his friend Lazarus to leave in making him come out of his burial. Now, in this text, when we speak about taking care, which I believe is truly a spiritual, theological, and mystical dimension, taking care is a dynamism, is a dynamic movement, the dynamic movement of approaching the other in his difficulty, in his situation, to return towards the living ones. And never basically touching, never believing that you can control and master, to taking advantage. And so this is the invitation of the Levite. It's quite, you know, ironic, because the person who was supposed to know, so will have to basically eliminate all his knowledge, abandon all well-known track or path, and become like a homeless, like a powerless. If actually tomorrow he will want to really know who is his neighbor, if he really wants to love his neighbor one day, and to become a misbeliever, an heretic, because it is the Samaritan from which he will learn. So the minister of the cult, because it is this misbeliever, so this heretic person who acts very precisely according to God's heart. So, and then with this, these are my final and concluding words. The spiritual dimension of taking care is above all the others who are revealing us, because they are the ones who are taking care to show and to tell us who is the real God when we try to take care of them. Thank you very much. Thank you, really, thank you very much, Veronique, for basically entering into the spiritual dimension. We have really listened to a psychological, biblical, and theological interpretation or explanation, but which is very dynamic. I would like to underline two elements in particular. The spiritual dynamic of taking care is something we cannot master. It is a dynamic in our relationship. We receive and we give and we receive. It's a give and take. So it gives certain openness to our lives. And the second element I would like to highlight is that in taking care, we do not allow absurdity to prevail. but we enter into the absolute. Thank you, really. Thank you very sincerely. And I would like to invite all the participants to now take a moment of silence, somehow to digest a little bit and to think at some questions that we can share in the chat. We're going to choose some of them, of course, inevitably. We won't be able to choose them all. And we will then we have 10 minutes of sharing before listening to a final testimony. If you have any questions, you can ask them through the chat. So you take the time to write your questions through the chat.
I will move into English now. I think it's difficult to ask questions because the team is helping us to enter in our inner space. Some questions are arriving. I'm waiting for some minutes. I want to ask a question to both of you, and then I will leave you time to respond or to comment. The fact that we are open to others, to taking care, there is also a personal exposure to risk. So the question is, who cares for caregivers? And I know the leaders, especially in this time of COVID, really suffered a lot also to deal it, to accompany the communities and the sisters. So this is a question for both of you. Now I'm going to take two questions from the chat. One is in Spanish, in English, and one in French, and I will read the French one first.
So we cannot master taking care. So how can we cultivate it since we cannot master it?
This is for both of you. You will answer from a different perspective. In English, is there more written on how we can train our brains to grow in kindness and other virtues? There is another question in English, and then I will give the floor to both of you. Spiritual dimension cannot be commanded. So how to imbibe it? So how to experience it? Marianne, the floor is yours first. You have more or less 5 minutes.
Okay, no, thank you very, very much. Patricia, you've commented about the, and Samira brought it up earlier, one of the ways that we really need to focus on kindness is also that sense of caring for ourselves. And I think the more we're in tune with ourselves and more reflective of our experiences, the more we can kind of develop the competencies I was talking about. I think the fact that we live in community is obviously ideal for getting feedback and support and experience, but it's also one of the challenges because, as we know, it's not always easy to live in communities sometimes and to hear that feedback. So one of the things I would want to say is, how can we create a culture of care amongst ourselves that enables us to then have the eyes to see the people on the outer who need more support or more help in our society. So I think our practice and policies of being together with a view to how they can then enable us to be in ministry, in the neighborhood is important. And we're not all the same. So as communities and in different geographies, so that has to be thought through. But I think I want to take some of the pressure away from it just being us individually, but because most of us live in community, how can our communities also help shape us to be more caring people? So that's point number one. Point number two, in order to learn more about what I was talking about, I can send a website. I was just looking for it quickly, but Berkeley in California has some very good, the university has some very good sites for just understanding this, what I'm calling positive psychology and kindness. And really you can just Google it. And it talks about skills. I find them a bit secular because it is psychology. They do talk about meditation, spirituality, but not often with a God in mind. And that's where I think our uniqueness is. And I think Veronique has helped us to see that, is that we bring that spiritual dimension and we're gifted with it to actually help us to respond or to be called out of ourselves to the person in need, and also to expose our vulnerability. So that would be my start for a couple of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne, to highlight the importance to care for ourselves. So I think this is very important. Sister Veronique, the floor is yours.
Alors, c'est difficile de répondre. Mais...
Well, it's not an easy question to answer. I would start by saying that who can take care of, well, who does that? Maybe we could be provocative. Whoever, who cares? I'm not really interested in knowing who's going to take care of myself, of those, of course, I believe that I will need someone to take care of me someday. But I would question myself. I'm not indifferent. I actually use my talents, my abilities, my skills, and I put all of this at the service of that face, as Levinas is telling us, because our communities are called to be responsible for the life of others. So now questioning and asking how others are taking care of ours is not really something which concerns me. I wouldn't say it's my main concern. It's not my top concern, at least, although I'm very much aware of what Marianne was saying, that is to take care of yourselves. But I think that there is a movement, an outward going, movement, daring to go out from yourself, which is a call, which is a call we have received from God and from in our spiritual life, who's basically contrasting absurdity, is also leading and leading man towards death. So I think that we are actually invited and also to use the metaphor of Emmanuel Levinas, we are called and caught by the gaze of the other, especially when the other is the wounded man on the road of the Samaritan, where the Samaritan is not asking anything. He's not looking at anything. He's simply taking care. And basically, his life shows that the person is vulnerable. He's actually on the verge of dying. Christian men and women, we as religious men and women are there to basically show that our Lord is a Lord of life, is the God of life, the God of giving a meaning to our life, and that even a God who through his life and his death is fighting against absurdity, fighting against what is on the lower end of our world. How can I cultivate taking care because we are unable to master and control it? I don't really know. Probably we should try what we do in our community lives are certainly a school. Probably we are not called to be simply spectators of this world. That is the symbol of indifference. When we are simply looking at our world, just like Pope Francis, when Pope Francis tells us, when you cry, you're crying like a crocodile. So we should not be crocodiles, but we should not be spectators, but we should not be simple, passive, televiewers or spectator, because this is simply a show and we cannot. So when you're simply sitting in your sofa, you will remain seated and will not do anything. So what is at stake for us is not to be spectators in this world, not to be spectators of others, but rather with our strengths, with our abilities, with the strengths and the abilities of our communities, which are small, maybe are sometimes fragile, maybe precarious, but maybe we should ask how, with our neighbors, we cannot remain simple spectators in our daily lives. We are called to act, to respond, if not of others' lives, but at least of something which makes our neighbor's life less dependent, less lonely, less precarious. And in so doing, I believe that we truly cultivate taking care, as well as the spiritual dimension I mentioned will certainly come along, and we will also receive in abundance by those we will encounter along our road and who talk about God's heart, who speak God's language. And certainly, and above all, when they are not aware, not even mentioning God. So once again, not being spectators, not being prophets of evil, because in this world there is far too much evil. We don't need to have other heralds of evil or other prophets of evil, but rather trying to be artisans of humanity. I believe that's the best way of cultivating taking care that we cannot master.
Thank you very much, Veronique. Thank you to our speakers who really accompany us to reflect on taking care as really the core and mission of Religious Sisters. So thank you very much. Before we move towards the dessert and the conclusion, I just would like to highlight two questions that are in the chat. I don't want you to answer, just to keep it with you, because questions help us to reflect and to go more in depth. The first question is in French. Comment nous faire aider?
How can we be helped to overcome the temptation of blindness? So not to fall in the temptation of blindness. In our communities, quite often we live this dichotomy. When we criticize each other, when we do not appreciate each other, what could help us in sort of overcoming these contrasts? How can we help each other in overcoming this dichotomy?
Further reflection for you and for your community. So now I'm very happy to welcome Sister Niluka Pereira. Welcome.
Thank you, Patricia.
Sister Niluka is the international coordinator of the newest project of the USG, which is Catholic Care for Children International. She's representing the dessert in this meal because she will share with us a testimony of this project. It's a concrete example of how we can nurture a culture of care. Sister Niluka Pereira is a member of the congregations of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd. She has served in the congregation as a social worker in different capacity, which includes the care of children in institutional and community-based settings. She was a member of the Commission of Justice and Peace in her province and the Good Shepherd Asia Pacific Network. She represented the Sisters of Good Shepherd at various social networks, groups, both local and internationally, especially in issues concerning women and children. She holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in social work. She's currently the coordinator of the Catholic Care for Children International of the USG. So, Sister Niluka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patricia. Greetings to all of you. Indeed, it's a privilege for me to share my reflections with you on this global platform. I thank the organizers for inviting me to speak today. Now I am going to share my screen with you. I'd like to begin my presentation by drawing your attention to creation. We know the theme of today's webinar is care. The word care is very much reflected in creation. All creatures of the universe, including human beings, take care of each other. We are dependent and interdependent with each other. We know that without one another, the survival of the creatures of the universe is not possible. So I see the word care as one of the core principles of creation since the dawn of existence. When we consider the Bible, both in the Old and New Testaments, the love and care of God is its core theme from the very first pages to the last. The love, concern, care, and protection of God for His creation are the pillars. We see how God called people like Abraham, Moses, Judith, Esther, Naomi, Ruth, Jonah, and many others to liberate the people and to show his care and protection for them. God says, I can hear the cry of my people. I am your God, you are my people. So we see in Isaiah how God brings the marginalized people to the front lines of the spiritual battle. He connects the way a nation cares for the orphan with the degree to which God's people truly know God is. In the New Testament, during his 3 years of public ministry, we see how Jesus was always with the sick, the hungry, the outcast, and those at the margins of the society. His ministry was directed towards the vulnerable of his time. He included all. The Acts of the Apostles describe how the early Christian communities had organized themselves in caring for the widows and orphans. So the ministry to the vulnerable and the marginalized are at the very heart of the gospel. We can see how the ministry of care to widows and children continues in the world as Jesus commanded. It is interesting to learn that the Romans began establishing orphanages from 400 AD onwards, followed by the Greeks. In the Middle Ages, the care of orphans became the responsibility of bishops, monasteries, or parishes. The flourishing of the numbers of the institutional care for children occurred in the 19th century due to urbanization and industrialization, which caused urban poverty, diseases, wars, and conflicts. Families in need and those who faced crises have turned to men and women religious. Women religious congregations, especially, have been at the forefront in responding to the needs of care for children. The known and accepted method of caring for children who are orphan and vulnerable was the institutional care. As we look back to what happened in the past, we know that sisters worked in the orphanages often had little or no training on the aspect related to child care. They were working in demanding environments which required formation and training as counselors, psychologists, and social workers. However, sisters with their big heart offered their love, care, and concern to the children as best they could with their limited resources and training. They were part of the culture of their time. Current statistic tells us that the Catholic Church worldwide oversees over 9,000 orphanages, caring for almost 5 million children. So looking at today's context, we now know that 80% of children in orphanages have a living parent or a close relative. Many are living in orphanages, although most have at least one parent living. We know that children are generally placed in orphanages because of poverty. The responsibility for the upbringing of a child outside of a family care is a profound moral responsibility. Social and scientific studies have proven that nurturing family environments are associated with positive outcomes for children's development. Children need loving, nurturing relationships, a sense of belonging, and knowing that they are loved. God made us into families. We know God placed Moses in a family of Egyptians under the care of the daughter of Pharaoh, and Jesus in the family of Mary and Joseph to be better cared for. Therefore, families are essential for our existence. Families, whether nuclear, extended, biological, or of choice, are fundamental to our well-being. Pope Francis reminds us that for sound development, a child needs to be nurtured and to develop a sense of belonging that only a family can fully provide it. So I'm happy to say that we, as women religious in different parts of the world, have been reading the signs of the times and are finding innovative ways to provide the best care possible for the children who need care and protection. They make efforts to make the charism of care relevant in today's context, and they work to ensure a family or a family-like environment for children separated from their families. The development of the Catholic Care for Children movement, in short we say CCC movement, is such an innovative effort of the women religious. With the help of GHR Foundation, the Association of Religious of Uganda gave birth to the CCC movement in 2016. CCC is a sister-led, charism-driven movement to ensure children grow up in safe, loving families or in a family-like environment. Within 3 years, the roots of the movement spread into Zambia and Kenya. The beauty of the CCC movement is that it connects the religious institutes that had been working isolated in the care sector. It brings them together into a common platform at their respective country level and facilitates the process to identify the ingredients needed to update their work in the care sector. The CCC movement in Uganda, Kenya, and Zambia has proven us how strong we religious are when we come together. The assumption on which the work of the CCC is based on are win the hearts and minds of the people for care reform and develop the skills and capacities needed of them leading to change. I am proud to say that the sisters in these 3 countries have become champions in care reform. They have become the voice for the many voiceless children living in orphanages for many years, otherwise have experienced life in a family. So under the project of CCC, the sisters and the caretakers received professional training and skills in social work, counseling and psychology, child safeguarding, child protection, case file management, and many other skills in taking care of children. Now they are better equipped to provide care for the children in the orphanages. It is quite evident that if we could provide support and empower families, many children who lived in orphanages can go back to their families. Sisters are now more engaged with the families and communities, and they try their best to empower them socially and economically, so that the child can go back to the family. Sisters now know how to reintegrate a child into the family, to the society. They know how to prevent or they discourage a child seeking entering into the institution without a valid reason by offering other alternatives. By doing so, the sisters were able to reduce the number of children in the orphanages, thus providing the child who really needs institutional care to enjoy the best care from the institution. To make the vision to have a family for a child a reality, the sisters and the staff and all other stakeholders work in providing care for children need to value the importance of the family for a child to grow holistically. It calls for our commitment to keep families safe and together. God's original plan of a child is to grow up in a family. Therefore, no child should live in an institution because the family is poor or the family finds difficult to access basic health services, social protection, or education. Last year in October, the Union of the International Superiors General, UISG, took this responsibility by initiating Catholic Care for Children International, we say CCCI. Taking the learnings and the experiences of the three countries, CCCI, as a global platform of women religious, invites women religious in the globe to be part of the CCC movement. CCCI makes efforts to organize religious congregations at their country level and links the resources necessary to begin the CCC movement in their respective countries.
Niluka, you have 1 minute.
Decades ago, we religious were at the forefront in taking care of children in institutional settings. Now, we know what suits best for the child to grow. It is not an institution, but the family. So let's be at the forefront in bringing about changes in the way we care for children. I would like to end my presentation with an excerpt from Pope Francis's message in declaring year 2021 as dedicated to the Amoris Laetitia family year. Let us support the family. Let us defend it from what comprises its beauty. Let us approach this mystery of love with wonder, discretion, and tenderness. Let us commit ourselves to safeguarding its precious and delicate bonds. Children, parents, grandparents. We need these bonds to live and to live well, to make humanity fraternal. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Sister Niluka, for helping us to enter more concretely on how care is the style and the attitude of mission of religious sisters. Thank you very much. I just want to highlight before giving the floor to Sister Pat Murray to conclude this webinar on care. I would like just to say that in our website, you will find the brochure, the charter, the statement of the Catholic Care for Children project in different languages. So you can share, read it and share with your communities. Thank you very much, Sister Niluka. Here, Sister Pat, thank you. We talk a lot about care. So I have a question for you to close this webinar. What horizons USG see for this culture of care?
Patrizia always asks a difficult question. I've just arrived halfway through this webinar because I'm trying to be present in several places. Zoom invites us to that. And when I think of care, and several of the speakers have mentioned it in different ways, I think a culture of care has to become part of the whole environment of our religious life communities. And I think in developing kindness, in recognizing vulnerability in ourselves and in others, in reaching out to the woundedness and the wounds that we find in society and in our persons. All of these various elements, and including initiatives like Catholic Care for Children International, they put care and compassion at the center of life. And compass, to feel with, to enter in. I was reflecting as Veronique spoke that the Good Samaritan had to get down off the horse and to go into the ditch to rescue the man who was wounded, who didn't ask for him. So he had to make that effort. But I suspect in reaching in to help, that he was confronted with himself in the decision to reach out and help, and probably confronted with his own vulnerability and his own woundedness. I think of my own experiences in life of reaching out wherever there's care needed. It invites a change in myself, but it also invites me to name my own need for care. And it's in reaching out, St. Francis says it, it's in giving you receive. So in reaching out to help another, somehow an even greater help is returned to myself or to you. So I think we're in a moment of journey in our human story, but also in our religious life story, where we reflect together on care at the personal level, but also our duty of care at the communal level. And then as congregations worldwide, how together we can promote a culture of care, of kindness and compassion. So I think that's the vision that we hold at UISG, that we as women religious have a critical role to play. We're not the only people who have a role to play, but let us play our part so that there is care, kindness, compassion for vulnerability, for anybody who is suffering or has suffered. And Pope Francis calls us to be that kind of field hospital. So that's my prayer for us and for all of you as we finish. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Sister Pat, to give us a question that our participants can share with their community to keep reflecting on this culture of care. And I would like also to say that on our website, there is the last edition of bulletin focused on safeguarding. So it's another form, another attitude for caring. So you can download it in different languages. I think that one thing we have learned today, the fragility and vulnerability is not something that we have to keep apart, but it's something that we can invest to be mission in our world. We go to close, but we will meet again next week for the 5th meeting of Sisters Empowering Women on Advocacy. And in September, we will talk, September 29, we will talk about peace, and it will be the final meeting of this series. I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank the interpreters, and I want to thank Sister Therese Rad. She was behind the scenes to make everything possible. So thank you very much to all of you, and please now go to take a coffee and keep reflecting on cultural care. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.